This is Conversation with Chuck Mraz for the Kentucky Marriage Equality and Religious Liberty Oral History Project. We are in the studio room of Morehead State Public Radio on Morehead State's campus located in Round County, Kentucky. Today is August 9th, 2016, and the time is 10:30 a.m. My name is Sherry Kelly. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview with us, Chuck.
Not a problem.
Do you want to give us a little bit of biographical information, such as where you were born and where you grew up?
Well, I was born in the Chicago area. Grew up mainly in the northern suburbs of Chicago. Outside of about 4 years when I was very small, my dad was transferred to Dallas and lived there until I was about 6 years old. Went through about half of first grade there, then moved back to the Chicago area, then lived there for a good chunk of my life, and went on to school and college at Southern Illinois University, and then worked at various places downstate and in the Chicago area, then came here to Morehead in 1986, and this is where I now reside and work.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about some of your childhood experiences?
Well, probably not, because there might be some legal issues that still may be involved in some states.
Okay. What about your current occupation?
I'm currently the news director here at Morehead State Public Radio, and I've been here since 1986, but as news director since it would be the fall of 2005.
Do you want to elaborate on your religious upbringing or your background with religion?
Well, originally my mother is Catholic and my dad was Lutheran, but when they got married they were Episcopalian for a while. They thought that, I guess that was a nice way to mediate the situation. Then my mom, after my parents divorced, raised me as a Roman Catholic.
Okay. What about your current church membership or organizational involvement?
I'm a member of the Morehead Catholic Church, Jesus Our Savior.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit. How did you first react to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on same-sex marriage?
Well, I knew that as a reporter, I knew that there would probably be some kind of a firestorm. I didn't know how much of that would happen locally, but I was kind of curious to see how things developed on a national stage regarding that ruling, and kind of where things would go and how it would be challenged, and whether it would be challenged legally or would it be challenged by individuals in some other way. So I was curious, is what I guess the best way of putting it. I was just curious to see what might happen and how people would respond to it and how dug in they would be perhaps in their positions.
Okay. What was your reaction to the Round County Clerk's decision not to issue marriage licenses?
Well, I called Kim Davis the Monday after the Friday when they made the Supreme Court ruling, and actually I was the first person to talk to her about it. I know that she gets in early in the morning, so I called her, I think it was shortly before 8 o'clock that morning, just to ask her, because I figured it would be routine. I would ask her because I knew that the marriage licenses would likely have to be changed in some way and the process might have to be adjusted. So I called just to ask about that, and lo and behold, when I talked to her, she admitted that she had some problems with the issue, and then she asked me, she actually started crying because she was pretty upset, and I wonder, I've known her for a while, and I said, Kim, what's wrong? And she goes, can we talk off the record? And I said, sure. And we spoke off the record about the fact that she was going to challenge this, and she didn't feel right about the situation from her own religious upbringing and her own religious beliefs. She felt like that she couldn't participate, and she explained that she knew that there was going to be some trouble regarding it and some backlash. How much, she said she didn't know, but she knew that this thing could cause some problems for her. And then I allowed her to compose herself. I said, well, Kim, I need to talk to you on the record about this. I said, take what time you need to get yourself together. I said, I understand, and so we talked a little bit more, and she said, okay, I'm fine. And so we talked about it, and from there, obviously, things kind of blew up.
Okay. As a broadcaster, what was it like to cover this story?
Well, initially, again, I didn't know how much of a firestorm this would create. I didn't ever have, in my wildest dreams, the idea that this would Kim Davis, the Rowan County Clerk, would become a national issue, and her beliefs on the subject would be talked about on news stations, in the newspapers. They'd be talked about on entertainment stations, on my direct TV, for instance. I didn't know how big it would be, really, and of course, because it was right here, we're at the epicenter of this entire issue in many ways, next to the person who helped kind of make the reverberations which created the epicenter. We had to cover it pretty much on a daily basis. It seemed like there was, at no time for several months, was I really off duty regarding that issue. Every day I was kind of thinking about, what do we need to do? Who do we need to call? We need to be fair. We need to make sure that we're dealing with all sides of this, whether it's talking with Kim Davis's attorneys, the ACLU, or other people involved, perhaps the plaintiffs, or other people who are protesting either on one side or the other. Every day it seemed like that I was involved with this story. Even when I left the office, I'd start planning for the next day. And of course, when I turned on my television at home, lo and behold, there it is again, and I'm getting pounded by this very same issue. After a while, it became almost like a post-traumatic stress syndrome thing for me, because it was almost like I couldn't escape it, and I couldn't get out from underneath it. And so it was creating a lot of personal stress for me too as well.
Were you the only one here at MSPR that did the reporting?
No, we had several different people who were involved. My assistant news director, Dan Conti, of course, was very involved. And then we had a number of student reporters that we utilized during that situation to go out and talk with people and call people on the phone, and they were a huge help.
How would you rank this story in your career as a broadcaster?
Well, as far as maybe national impact, it would have to be perhaps at the top of the list. And it's kind of interesting for me to think that all of the reporting started with me. And I say that because people don't realize that after I talked to Kim and we did the stories on the air, one of my former reporters who was working at the local paper, the Morehead News, picked it up and ran it. And then her parent company owns the Ashland paper, the Ashland Independent. And of course, they picked up her story on it. And from there, of course, the Ashland Independent is an Associated Press member. The AP picked it up from a state level. And then when the state picked it up, the state AP picked it up. Of course, the national office was interested. They picked it up. And that's kind of where it went from there. And then, of course, it went to places like Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and, CBS, NBC, ABC, all the networks. And, of course, the USA Today and major newspapers across the country.
Okay. Very interesting. What did you think about the protest?
I think everybody's got a right to protest. The one thing that kind of bothered me about the whole situation is that people were saying that so-and-so doesn't have a right to do this, or so-and-so doesn't have a right to say this. In this country, we have the First Amendment right of freedom of speech, whether you're for something or against something. We've always had that right. And so, I understood the protests on both sides. I understood the depth of the emotion on both sides. But I think that one thing that did bother me, I guess, was the fact that a lot of people felt like perhaps the other people on the other side didn't have the right to say what they were saying.
What was the environment like at the protest?
Well, I think a lot of times it was more civil than what many people realize. I think, quite frankly, that if there was trouble out at the protests here, say at the county courthouse, a lot of it was being caused by people from outside Rowan County who'd come in to involve themselves with one side or another and to try to create an issue. I think the people here locally handled themselves in a pretty good fashion overall.
Did you think that Rowan County Clerk best represented the cause of religious liberty?
I don't know how to answer that exactly. I think it brought the issue to the forefront of people's minds and exactly what does religious liberty mean. And again, it comes back to people talking about the idea of religion and government and things of that nature and the constitutional protections regarding it. So I think that it was an important issue to get out there. I think a lot of people are still undecided on what their ideas about it might be and what all of this might mean.
What do you believe was the appropriate way to handle the situation?
Well, from a reporter standpoint, to try to stay right down the middle. I mean, that's what every reporter, I think, should do with every situation and everything that they cover, especially when you get into political issues or things of this type nature. I think it's important to be fair to both sides, and I'm afraid that in today's journalistic environment that's not always the case. Things have changed a great deal from what I was taught to do when I went to school and the way things were when I first got out of school. I think too often times the media decides to pick a side and often push an agenda, and I don't think that's our job. I think our job is to report the facts on both sides of the issue and allow the reader, the viewer, or listener to make up their own mind as to what they think.
Do you think she deserved to be imprisoned?
Well, I think, that's not really for me to say in many ways. I think that was for the judge to decide, and obviously Judge Bunning made that decision. But I think what it did was it even brought a very hot issue, I guess, to the forefront of the burner and turned up those burners and made it an even hotter issue. I think it did make a martyr out of Kim Davis, especially for those on her side, rather. I do believe that, and I think that it was interesting to see the reaction of the people at the Carter County Courthouse when she was released. It made an already interesting story even a little bit more interesting.
What were your thoughts upon her release?
Well, I wanted to see where things would go from there. How she would handle herself, what she would do when she got back on the job, and what would happen at the Rowan County Courthouse, and what types of protests might be there again, and what she would do when she was faced with the decision to whether she should issue a marriage license or not, and what she would say and how she would deal with it.
What are your thoughts on the reactions of your local elected officials?
They did a pretty good job, I think, of staying out of it. It wasn't for them to get involved. I thought they did a good job of trying to stay right down the middle with it like we did as reporters, and not take sides and try to be fair with everybody and not get involved, because really they have a job to do, and some of that job really doesn't involve what was going on with Kim Davis.
Do you think the media attention this event received was appropriate?
That's a really good question. I think that in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. You're talking about a county clerk in eastern Kentucky in a county of about 25,000 people. And I think that people decided to make it a focal point of the overall issue. And I think that fair or unfair, that's kind of the way things turned out. And I think that she was browbeaten a lot more than she should have been. I thought some of the criticisms were unfair, because, again, she has a right to her opinion, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. The fact that she has another opinion should have been respected just a little bit more. I didn't like some of the name calling that I saw on television by so-called celebrities, which indicates to me that a lot of celebrities are idiots, quite frankly. And just because they get paid more and they're on television or they're in movies or and they're in print or wherever, doesn't make them any smarter than we are, and doesn't make their opinion any more valuable than ours. But I thought some of the stuff that was said didn't need to be said, because it only made things worse.
How do you think Rowan County has changed because of these events?
I think it's not really changed. I think people believe the same thing they believed before all this started. Whatever side of the issue they're on, they're still on. I don't think it really changed anybody's mind. if anything, because of some of the anger in the issue, it may have only deepened their positions and entrenched them on the side that they're already in.
Do you think it drew Round County closer together or farther apart, or neither?
I think things just seem the same to me as they were before all this started. I think that everyone's sort of back to living their lives and doing their own thing. I think most people have the belief that unless it impacts them directly, they're not going to worry about it. They're going to let you live your life, and they're going to live theirs, and if you don't mess with them, they're not going to mess with you, and they're going to go about their business and expect you to do the same.
Do you believe this debate over religious liberty or marriage equality is over?
No, I think it'll come up again. I think it'll come up again in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know when, but I think it will. I think something else will happen to bring it to the attention of people around the country, and then we'll start things all over again.
Has this event changed you?
Not really. Not really.
Do you have any comments or thoughts you'd like to add?
No, I think I pretty well covered it. As I said, I think the one thing that we need to do is respect other people's opinions. If they're different from ours, that's fine. But at the same time, it doesn't need to devolve into name-calling and angry rhetoric, because it's not going to convince the person on the other side to join your side. It's only going to push them farther away, if anything else. I think there needs to be a bit more understanding when we talk about these issues. And I think things, again, I think when it gets to the media and talking about, say, whether it's a reporter who works in radio, television, or newspaper, I believe we need to go back to doing the job the way it was intended to be done. And that was to report with fairness in mind, both sides, not just the facts that you agree with, but the things that perhaps you don't agree with, and let the people who are your consumers make their own minds up about what they think on the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck, for this interview.